Capita envisions a future in which children and families can flourish. By prioritizing our youngest children, their families, and their communities, we have the potential to radically transform the fabric of our societies for the long term. In this series of Capita in Conversation, we talk to interviewees from around the world to hear their stories, knowledge, wisdom, and ideas on how to create child and family flourishing. In this episode, Capita co-founder and CEO Joe Waters talks with UpTogether CEO and Ascend fellow Jesús Gerena about wealth inequality and the work UpTogether is doing to help low-income people.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Waters, the co-founder and CEO of Capita, and delighted to be here today for this Capita in Conversation with Jesús Gerena, who is the CEO of UpTogether. Jesus and I have known each other for a little over 2 years now, I think, or maybe not even 2 years, as Aspen Institute Ascend Fellows. We were together in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago and had a really lovely conversation following a fantastic presentation that Jesus gave at the Aspen Forum on children and families. And so I just wanted to continue the conversation with him today here at this Capita in Conversation. And Jesus, really what struck me was that your relentless focus on wealth inequality and getting money, not just services or programs, to low-income people. And I think that where we really had some great conversation is that we tend to focus on programs and services to enhance the capabilities of the poor without really acknowledging the fact that the playing field is not fair, not equal, not even, that we're essentially giving people a lot of programs and services to enhance with the idea of enhancing their capabilities without recognizing that the playing field of the economy onto which they hopefully would move with those capabilities is itself unequal and not fair. So just share with us your sort of big idea, the bold idea that you presented at that Aspen Forum on children and families, and a little bit about how you think about the work that UpTogether is doing to help low-income people.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And absolutely, and really happy to sort of get to continue this conversation. As I shared at the time, the big idea here is that we need a new redistribution of wealth. And the reason for that is it's a recognition that the systems as they exist are intentionally depriving investment to the lower 20% of earners in the country. And to put that in perspective, and as I joked during the great idea conversation, is that this isn't a new great idea. It already exists, right? Like, we are investing 70 times that to the already wealthy, the top 20% of earners. And so that inequity that exists continuously pinches people to just make ends meet, right? And as such, they are just doing enough to be able to get by. They're crammed in trying to be able to pay bills, rent, and support we work mainly with families, the educational or whatever aspirational goals they have for their children. And they can't make it past, right? Like they're always just on that line, always having to make or living in scarcity in a place that puts them in a position to always have to judge what to pay today, what not to pay tomorrow. But it's really sits on the basis that we are intentionally creating that position for them by not recognizing the positive that they're contributing. They're hard workers, hard earners, as well as our ability and our the prosperity that exists in this country to be able to share and invest in them just the same as we do with other parts. And then, right, on top of all of that is who needs it the most, right? Is it the person that already has $500,000 worth of assets, $1 million worth of assets, 5, 10 millions, right? Or is it the person who's just getting going and beginning to build that asset building that could really help position them to get to the middle class? And that's the part that we just don't talk enough about. And on top of that, from the perspective that we're coming from the nonprofit sector, we're the sector overwhelmingly continues to just look at them and being like, those people are broken. They need help. We need to create programs and invest in services and supports to position them to do better. And, I can politely say, yes, I get that. Absolutely. There's need and people need help, but that shouldn't be our first instinct. If we recognize the inequities that exist on top of the racial dynamics of this country and specifically to those who have the most representation in representative of their population percentage, which is African Americans, right? Like racist policies have always also choked any sort of meaningful investment to these communities that have exacerbated the problem for them.
So let's talk a little bit about right now what UpTogether does to address this. And core to your approach and model is giving cash, as I understand it, directly to low-income people. So talk a little bit about how you do that, the resistance that you might hear about that, and what difference it's making for the people you work with.
Yeah, so we've been around now 20 years, and from the very beginning, the idea was cash, community, and choice. And just to start with cash, that people who were experiencing economic hardship knew best how to be able to drive themselves out. They could easily identify goals for themselves and pursue them. And as we shared in that learning, and they share that information with us, we compensated them for their time and their knowledge and their abilities. And then that last piece on community is that for them to be able to thrive, connections are critical. Whether it's the connections that you have of a community of people that can just provide emotional support, or crowdsource ideas for you to be able to think how to in a way to overcome challenges and opportunities. But then there's also the social capital, right, which is really transactional. A lot of the times it's just like, hey, I need a job. Do you know somebody here? Oh, great, make a connection so that I could have a better shot at getting that job. On the cash end, we've evolved that to where we're now investing on average about $500 a month, totally unrestricted, in individual households that meet a simple criteria in regards to having dependents, as well as being low-wage earners, and depending on geography of certain funds, making sure that they live in those certain areas. But what it allows us to do is to demonstrate what happens when we recognize the value of these households and these individuals and add extra dollars in their bank accounts. And what you can imagine is that scarcity mentality alleviates, even if it's temporarily, right? We do an 18-month to our 24-month commitment, and all of a sudden people are able to not just be in this place of making critical decisions on how to be able to pay for basic needs. Not only can they do that, but they can start creating and thinking, oh, wow, how do I maintain this in a way that mobility begins to occur, and start making strategic investments in my household that will support my ambitions.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'd love to just hear you out on the barriers to making that more widespread. Because one thing that we've seen, right, is that there have been a number of basic income pilots, family allowance pilots, these sorts of things. Certainly, we've seen it in the majority world, in low-income countries in Africa, where you give people money through their phone, and even to do that before disaster, they're more resilient in the face of disaster. So we know that this works, right? But one nonprofit after another, scaling it up in one small neighborhood to the next is not really a national strategy. So what are the barriers to that?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the biggest one is the disbelief that these people are worth investing in a direct cash way, which is to say that for most, even in those who want to help, there has been this overwhelming belief that you are somehow personal failure is the cause of your economic condition. And when personal failure, as your belief is the cause of that economic hardship, then it's like, well, let me help you figure out how not to be a failure anymore. And so you really need to embrace and understand and say, no, actually, this generational poverty hasn't been because of lack of effort, but going back to the way that for the last 40 plus years, we've been squeezing this population. And while on the other side, again, and this is important because we have evidence of how when we unleash investment in a group of people, they build and grow their wealth in a way that, philanthropy is popping up everywhere because people are trying to figure out what to do with their wealth. They have so much of it, right? So I think that's a really critical leading challenge that happens, that it's even today in the narrative, right? Like there's a debt ceiling conversation in Washington happening, and the underpinning of holding up this superficial line that people continue to move one way or the other is, hey, can we make Medicaid workers, recipients work to make sure that they're not just mooching? When it's just not the case. And not only that, if that narrative was true, close to half of people who are eligible for transitional assistance, TANF benefits, don't apply to them, right? It's just not real, right? Like that narrative, it's totally been made up in a way to, again, help support that squeezing. So that's the biggest challenge. On the other side, what are some of the policies that could really do this? There's been a great guaranteed income movement. And a lot of the places, they talk about tying that back into the earned income tax credit. We've talked about that here and been seeing some of the benefits of it in California. Already that has been increased a little bit. And then you can model that, whether it's through what just happened through the pandemic and the increase of $500 per kid extra over a 6-month period of time. That alone lifted half of our kids out of poverty, 3 million kids out of poverty immediately, right? So it proves that there is, to your earlier point, cash works. Other things also have to happen, but let's recognize that these people are just equally deserving of investment. And what policies can we do? And the last thing that I also say, and I continue to rise, it doesn't have to be just through tax credit or earned income tax credit in this case, but universal health care would support millions of people in this country and put a ton of dollars back in their pocket, as well as probably be cheaper than all the subsidies that we're providing right now to healthcare to be able to keep up our system anyway. So there's all these pretty intricate ways that we continue to punish and keep any sort of investment of a care economy back to people. And I feel like there's a huge opportunity for us to do so.
Yeah, and I mean, you said a few minutes ago, right, that at least I think for the last 60 years, probably since the beginning of the Great Society programs in the mid-1960s, our first instinct has been to provide a program that can help people. And I think it was Daniel Patrick Moynihan who rather memorably said that that approach employed a lot of middle-class people to micromanage the lives of the poor. And, I'm just curious, first of all, to hear your thoughts on that, but also to hear, how we got turned around on this, because I think back to the New Deal and Social Security in particular, which was a program that provided cash based on previous earnings, based on the strength of the economy and so forth. But it provided cash to senior citizens, and in doing so, really eradicated most elder poverty in this country. And we haven't been able to do something, except for 6 months, we haven't been able to do something similar for kids, right? So what's your read on how we sort of got turned around from maybe an FDR Social Security approach to a Great Society approach, providing a lot of programs which certainly do a lot of good, but making that instead of cash our first instinct in terms of how we help low-income people?
Yeah, and I would even say, in the Clinton years, we all of a sudden there was a bipartisan agreement to be able to equally punish those who have been receiving any sort of benefit from a safety net that was developed, as you shared in the 60s, and as we sort of recognize the ability to act on poverty in a meaningful way. But yeah, I think a lot of that was first how we vilified, and again, talked about those who were facing economic hardship as less than, othering. The classic welfare queen sort of character that was displayed as this is a person who's just trying to have kids to be able to benefit from a system and not have to do anything. There's no polite way of saying they were all lies, right? Like it was intentionally done to specifically continue to create this dynamic of hey, you've been struggling and you're a low wage earner, and we benefit from keeping you in this place. And those extra dollars that come, we can begin to channel and talk about trickle down and the benefits of investing in somebody who, has already acquired wealth and the jobs creation that they're going to do. And so that narrative just has taken on and been built from, to the point that like even, they blame inflation on lifting 3 million kids out of poverty, right? Like they're just like, oh, we treated them too well. Like, and somehow now we're paying the price as a result of it. When the truth is corporate greed, right? Like that's driving inflation. Profits for corporations continue to maintain high, and we do everything we can to be able to put them in a position to maintain that sort of return for their shareholders. And it's the main driver. But all that to say again is, even at that, there is still plenty for us to invest. Like there's no pie, right? Like this sort of narrative that there's some sort of pie that we can there's no pie. And we've proven that over and over again. So, I'm as perplexed as to, especially after that we were able to lift 3 million kids out of poverty, that there isn't an outcry of, wait, why aren't we doing more of that? When previous to that moment, we hadn't made any significant dent to the poverty rate in this country, let alone to those most affected, our most vulnerable, the ones that we should be protecting, our children. So it puts me in a place of sort of like my worst moments. So those are the moments I'm just like, man, like this is going to be hard. But I think that the knowledge and the ability, and part of that is the walking around and saying, why are we trying to fix people when people can fix themselves if we can just invest in them? And raising that more and more, I think it really can have whether it's in public policy or in philanthropy, a really shift and a fundamental change.
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to ask you about, Jesus, is the role of participation and ownership in the economy as really a critical sort of complement to a conversation about inequality, right? And, I think at Capita, a lot of people know that we've done a lot of exploration of the the role and the value of worker cooperatives in particular and other forms of cooperative ownership or employer ownership to really more widely distribute the benefits of this economy. How might you think about that as sort of a complement to the work that you're doing around cash assistance directly to low-income people?
I love that. I mean, I think going back to the community piece, which is also closely linked in everything that we do, and cooperative models are a great example of the way that people can begin to think about shared profit, not just for the benefit of my household, but the benefit of a number of households. But then in addition to that, the place that these companies can be in, one, easy, like has to happen, and we should be exploring and investing more in those models. I think that the second piece too is sort of from what happens as a result of the job creation and the ripple effect that those models can have inside of a community, which again, is sort of going back to those other narratives, are not necessarily helping people understand not only the value and the sustaining of poverty rates in this country, but the sort of this investment that happens inside of a community. And as a result of that deprivation opens it up to whether it's gentrification or flight of individuals who have been able to flourish, right, in their culture with people that will support them. And it's going to take those anchors. I mean, the other one too, I would say, is land trust, because as prosperity grows inside of these communities, as these pillars can be instituted in, now we're talking about generations being able to benefit from those investments, but also that hard work that those community members are able to bring forth.
Jesus, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for all that you're doing to build a future in which all families flourish.
Yeah, equally, Joe, and just that conversation just now around the co-op site. I have some ideas. We got to get into some trouble together.
I look forward to that. Thanks, Jesus.
Each episode of Capita in Conversation is produced by Michael Bettis and is available by podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as capita.org.